You think your home is safe? I thought so too. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer. Yet I forgot that the deadliest cracks appear from within that afternoon. A stranger's whisper at the checkout counter saved me from my own daughter. What waited in the attic was not rats, but a programmed death before I reveal what I found. Comment below, what city are you watching from now? Let's go back to that cold, rainy afternoon. My name is James Davis. I am 68 years old. And if there is one thing a lifetime as a structural engineer has taught me, it is that every collapse begins long before the dust settles. You do not see the hairline fracture in the concrete foundation. You do not hear the rivet groaning under a shear load it was never designed to bear. You only see the building when it is standing tall. And then, in a blink, you see the rubble I spent 40 years calculating these loads, predicting the breaking points of steel and stone in a city that sits on a fault line. I was good at it. I could look at a blueprint and tell you exactly where the stress would accumulate. But standing in line at the Whole Foods on Roosevelt Way that Tuesday afternoon, I failed to calculate the load on my own life. I did not see the stress fractures in my own foundation until the ceiling was already coming down on top of me. It was raining. Of course, it was raining in Seattle. The rain is not a weather event, it is a structural constant, a permanent live load that every roof in the city has to account for. It was a relentless, gray afternoon in November, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes your joints ache. I was standing in checkout lane 4, watching the rain lash against the large plate glass windows at the front of the store from where I stood. I found myself analyzing the window frames. They were aluminum mullions, likely reinforced. But the wind load today was significant. I caught myself calculating the deflection limit of the glass pane nearest the exit. It was a habit I could not shake. Retirement implies you stop working. But your brain never really signs the paperwork. You just switch from calculating skyscrapers to calculating the structural integrity of a grocery store queue. I was bored. That is the truth of it. Since my wife passed away 5 years ago, boredom had become my primary companion, a dull, aching presence that followed me from the empty kitchen to the silent living room. I came to the grocery store not because I needed food. My refrigerator was full of leftovers I would likely never finish, but because I needed the noise. I needed the ambient hum of refrigeration units, the beep of scanners, the murmur of other human beings living their lives. I was just killing time, waiting for the evening to come, waiting for the inevitable silence of the night. The line was moving slowly. The person in front of me was a woman who looked like she had been eroded by the same rain that was battering the windows. She was small, hunched over in a coat that had lost its color years ago, the fabric worn thin at the elbows and shoulders. She wore a wool hat pulled low over her ears, and strands of gray hair escaped the rim, frizzy with dampness. She was placing her items on the conveyor belt with a slowness that suggested pain in her joints. I watched her hands. They were red, the skin chapped and raw, the knuckles swollen. I knew those hands. I had seen them on the job site on cold mornings. Hands that had worked hard and received little in return. I looked at her groceries. It was a sad, small collection that told a story of survival. Not living 3 cans of generic vegetable soup, a loaf of the cheapest white bread, the kind that turns to paste in your mouth, 2 large cans of wet cat food, and a small box of peppermint tea. That was it. The cashier was a young man with a name tag that read Justin. He had the glazed, impatient look of someone who wanted to be anywhere else. He was scanning the items with a rhythmic aggression. Beep, 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 tossing them down to the bagging area without looking up. "That will be $28.40, Justin said, his voice flat. The woman, whom I would later know as Clara, froze. Her shoulders tensed up under that thin coat. She began to pat her pockets, her movements frantic and jerky. She pulled out a small, worn coin purse and a debit card that looked like it had been through the wash a dozen times. She swiped the card. The machine beeped. A harsh, descending tone declined. Just inside. It was a loud, theatrical sigh that was meant to be heard. He tapped the screen. "Try it again." She swiped again. Her hand was shaking now. I could see the tremor running from her wrist up to her elbow. Beep declined. "It is not working," Justin said, looking past her to the line of people behind me. "Do you have cash?" I should have enough," she whispered. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. She opened the coin purse and upended it onto the stainless steel counter quarters. Dimes, nickels, and a handful of pennies spilled out. Rolling toward the edge, she scrambled to catch a quarter before it fell, her face flushing a deep, painful red. 1, 2, 3. She started counting, her fingers fumbling with the coins behind me. Someone cleared their throat. It was a sharp, impatient sound. I did not turn around. But I could feel the irritation radiating from the person behind me, like heat from a radiator. This is the modern world, I thought. We have infinite patience for our screens. But we cannot spare 30 seconds for a human being in distress. "Ma'am, I have a line," Justin said, leaning back against his register. "You are short. You have maybe $6 here. The total is $28.40. "I can put the soup back," she stammered, grabbing the cans. "Just the cat food, my cat. He is old. He needs the wet food. I can put the bread back too." She looked small, so incredibly small. It hit me then. A sudden, sharp pang in the center of my chest. It was not pity. It was memory. I remembered my wife, Martha. I remembered how she never walked past a homeless person without stopping. She used to tell me, "James, nobody stands out in the rain because they want to get wet. You pay for the umbrella if you can afford it." Martha would have been heartbroken to see this woman trembling over a can of cat food while surrounded by people buying organic kale and imported cheese. The woman was reaching for the tea now, her hand hovering, trying to decide what she could live without. She was choosing between feeding her cat and having a warm cup of tea in the morning. No one should have to make that calculation. I stepped forward. The movement was automatic, a reflex honed by 40 years of marriage to a woman better than myself. "Leave it," I said. My voice came out deeper and louder than I intended. Cutting through the awkward murmuring of the line, the woman froze, a can of soup halfway to the return bin. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide. "I have it," I said to the cashier. I pulled my wallet from my back pocket and extracted my credit card. "Put her order on my tab, all of it." "Sir, you do not have to do that," the cashier said, though his hand was already reaching for my card, relieved to have the problem solved. "I know I do not have to," I said, keeping my eyes on the young man. "I am choosing to ring it up." The woman, Clara, stared at me. "No," she whispered. "No, sir. That is too much. I cannot let you. It is $28. That is too much money." "It is just groceries," I said gently. I stepped closer, placing myself between her and the impatient stare of the cashier. Please, my wife, she would have wanted me to do it as a favor to her. That silenced her. Mentioning the dead always does. She lowered her head, her hands clutching the empty coin purse to her chest. "Thank you," she breathed. "God bless you." I paid. The transaction took 10 seconds, the receipt printed, and I watched as the cashier shoved her items into a brown paper bag. I grabbed the bag before he could slide it across the counter. "I will walk you out," I said. "The bag looks heavy." It was not heavy. It weighed nothing. But I wanted to make sure she got out of there with her dignity intact. Away from the prying eyes of the people who had sighed at her poverty, we walked toward the automatic doors. The transition from the warm, artificial air of the supermarket to the damp, biting chill of the vestibule was abrupt. The rain was coming down harder now, a sheet of gray water blurring the parking lot. "You really did not have to," she said again. We stopped just under the overhang. out of the direct rain, but close enough to feel the spray on our faces. I looked at her properly for the first time, now that we were away from the harsh fluorescent lights. I saw her face clearly. She was older than I had thought. Perhaps in her late 70s, her face was a map of deep lines, etched by wind and sun and worry. But it was her eyes that stopped me. They were blue, not the pale, watery blue of the elderly that I saw in the mirror every morning. These were sharp, electric blue. They were clear, terrifyingly clear. There was no cloudiness, no hesitation. She was looking up at me, and I felt a sudden, strange sensation that she was not just looking at my face, but looking through the layers of my skin, past the muscle and bone, examining the structural integrity of my soul. It was the way I looked at a bridge before I signed off on the safety inspection. She was looking for cracks. "It is fine," I said, trying to hand her the bag. "Do you have a way home? Is there a bus?" She did not take the bag instead. Her hand shot out. It happened so fast I did not have time to recoil. She grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were thin, skeletal things. But her grip was shocking. It was iron hard. It was the grip of someone holding onto a cliff edge. I felt her fingernails dig into the wool of my sweater, pressing into the tendon of my wrist. "Sir," she said. Her voice had changed. The wavering, timid tone she had used with the cashier was gone. This voice was low, steady, and urgent. "Ma'am." I tried to pull my arm back, but she held on. She pulled me closer, stepping into my personal space until I could smell her. I expected the smell of unwashed clothes or stale rain instead. I smelled peppermint strong, sharp peppermint, cutting through the damp air, and underneath that, I smelled something primal. I smelled fear, not the nervous anxiety of being short on cash, but the metallic, acrid scent of terror. She leaned in, standing on her tiptoes, her lips inches from my ear. The rain hammered against the pavement around us, creating a wall of sound. But her whisper cut through it like a diamond cutter on glass. "Listen to me," she hissed. "Listen carefully." "You are hurting my arm," I said. Uneasy now, I looked around, wondering if I should call for security. Was she crazy? Was this a hustle? "When your daughter leaves for school tonight," she whispered, each word precise, and waited. "Do not sleep. Do not close your eyes. Check the attic. Check it immediately." I froze. The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. The sound of the rain faded into a dull roar in the background. "What?" I managed to say. My voice sounded hollow. "The attic," she repeated, her eyes locked onto mine, burning with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Your life depends on it. When she leaves for school, check the attic." She released my wrist as suddenly as she had grabbed it. I stumbled back a step, rubbing the spot where her fingers had dug in. "How?" I started, my mind racing, trying to find a logical anchor. "How do you know I have a daughter?" I had not mentioned Elena. I had not mentioned my family. I was just a stranger who paid $28 for cat food and soup. The woman, Clara, did not answer. She grabbed the grocery bag from my other hand. She looked at me one last time, and in that look, I saw a profound sadness, a pity that chilled me to the marrow. Then she turned and ran. She did not shuffle. She did not limp. She moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a woman of her apparent age. She darted out from the overhang and into the downpour. I watched her gray coat blend instantly with the gray rain and the gray asphalt. In 3 seconds, she was gone, vanished into the storm, like she had dissolved into the water itself. I stood there alone in the vestibule of the Whole Foods, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked at my wrist. The red indentations of her fingers were still visible. This was real. This had happened. Crazy. I muttered to myself, just a crazy old woman. I tried to rationalize it. That is what engineers do. We fix problems. We find logical solutions. She was mentally ill, She was paranoid. She had guessed it was a cold reading. Like those psychics on television. Everyone has a daughter or a son. Everyone has an attic or a basement. It was just a generic, scary warning meant to rattle a Samaritan. But as I walked to my car, dodging the puddles, the cold feeling in my gut would not go away. It sat there, heavy and leaden. I unlocked my car and sat in the driver's seat. The silence of the cabin closing in around me, I gripped the steering wheel, staring out at the rain-streaked windshield. "When your daughter leaves for school tonight," that was the phrase that stuck in my throat like a fishbone. It was the specific detail that shattered my attempt at rationalization. Elena, my daughter. Elena was 36 years old. She was a brilliant woman, a respected academic just 2 hours ago. While I was driving to the store, she had called me. Her voice had been cheerful, affectionate. "Dad," she had said, "I am going to swing by and see you tonight. I have to teach that graduate seminar at the University of Washington at 7. But I can come by around 6 for a quick cup of tea, just to check on you." I have to teach when your daughter leaves for school. The woman in the parking lot could not have known that there was no way she could have known that Elena was coming to my house tonight, and specifically that she was leaving afterwards to go to the university. That was not a guess. That was data. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was 5:15 in the afternoon. Elena would be at my house in 45 minutes. I started the engine, but my hands were shaking. I am a man of science. I believe in physics, in gravity, in the predictable properties of matter. I do not believe in psychics, or premonitions, or ghosts. But as I pulled out of that parking lot and turned onto the wet streets of Seattle, I could not shake the feeling that the foundation of my reality had just shifted. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth. Thump, thump, thump like a heartbeat. Check the attic. Why the attic? I hadn't been up in the attic in 3 years. Not since I put the Christmas decorations away the year before Martha died. It was just a dusty space, filled with insulation and old boxes. What could possibly be in the attic? I drove home, the tires hissing on the wet pavement. The city lights were blurring in the rain, turning into streaks of red and gold. Usually, I loved this drive. I loved looking at the skyline, seeing the buildings I had helped secure. But tonight, every shadow looked deeper. Every alleyway looked like a threat. I needed to calm down. I was James Davis. I was a professional. I was letting the ramblings of a homeless woman with a lucky guess get under my skin. Elena was my daughter. She was my only child. She loved me. The idea that her visit could be linked to something dangerous, something that required a warning from a stranger, was absurd. But as I turned onto my street, seeing my large, empty Victorian house looming in the darkness, the windows dark and staring like empty eye sockets, I realized something. I was terrified for the first time in my life. I was afraid to go into my own home, and as I pulled into the driveway, the rain drumming on the roof of the car, I whispered the words aloud, just to hear how insane they sounded. Check the attic. I turned off the engine. The silence rushed back in. I sat there for a long time, watching the rain, waiting for my daughter's car to pull in behind me, wondering if I was losing my mind, or if I had just been handed a map to save my life. I unlocked the heavy oak door of my home on Birch Street and stepped into the foyer. My house is a Queen Anne Victorian, a 3-story structure that I purchased 30 years ago when Elena was just a child, to the untrained eye. It is simply a well-maintained historic property, with decorative shingles and a wraparound porch. But I know the bones of this place because I rearranged them myself. I spent a decade retrofitting the frame, bolting the cripple walls to the foundation, and installing steel moment frames in the garage to resist lateral forces. I designed this house to withstand a magnitude 9 earthquake. I designed it to be a fortress against the violence of the earth. But as I hung my wet coat on the rack and listened to the silence of the hallway. I realized I had never calculated the structural load of betrayal. The house did not feel like a sanctuary tonight. It felt like a cage. And I was the canary, waiting for the air to run out. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6 times. The sound was deep and resonant, vibrating through the floorboards. Right on cue, headlights swept across the front window. Cutting through the gloom of the rainy evening, Elena was here. I watched through the sheer curtains as she parked her silver sedan in the driveway. She sat in the car for a moment before getting out. The interior light flickered on, and I saw her checking her face in the rearview mirror. She looked composed. She looked like the respectable academic she was, a woman who taught ethics and philosophy to graduate students. But then, I saw her hands. She was gripping the steering wheel so hard that even from this distance, I could imagine her knuckles turning white. She took a deep breath, the kind a diver takes before plunging into deep, dark water. And then she opened the car door. "I opened the front door before she could knock, Dad," she said, flashing a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "It is freezing out here." "Come in, Elena," I said. My voice sounded steady. Which surprised me. I felt like a bridge vibrating in high winds, ready to tear apart. But my facade held. She stepped inside, bringing the smell of rain and expensive perfume with her. She was wearing a sharp black blazer over a white blouse, tailored trousers, and leather boots. She looked successful. She looked like the daughter I had bragged about to my friends at the Rotary Club. But as she leaned in to hug me, I felt the tension in her frame. Her body was rigid, like a coiled spring. "I cannot stay long," she said. Pulling away quickly, she glanced at her wristwatch, a silver timepiece I had given her for her 30th birthday. "My seminar starts at 7, and with this rain, traffic on the bridge is going to be a nightmare. I just wanted to check on you." "That is thoughtful of you," I said. "Come sit down." We walked into the living room. I sat in my usual leather armchair, the one that had molded to my shape over the last 20 years. Elena did not sit. She paced around the room, picking up a framed photograph of her mother from the mantelpiece, then putting it back down without really looking at it. Her eyes were darting around the room, scanning the corners, the windows, the hallway. "You seem restless," I observed. "Just work stress," she said quickly. "The department head is breathing down my neck about the new curriculum. You know how it is." She turned to me, her expression suddenly shifting into a mask of exaggerated concern. "You look tired. Dad, are you feeling okay?" "Just the weather," I said. "My knees ache when the pressure drops." "I will make you some tea," she announced. It was not an offer, it was a command. "I brought some of that chamomile blend you like. It will help you relax." Before I could protest, she was already heading for the kitchen. I sat there, listening to the sounds of my daughter moving through my house, the clang of the kettle, the rattle of a ceramic mug, the opening and closing of drawers. It all sounded so normal, so domestic, and yet... The woman in the parking lot screamed in my memory. When your daughter leaves for school, Elena returned a few minutes later with a steaming mug. She placed it on the coaster beside me. "Drink it while it is hot," she said, standing over me. "It will warm you up." I looked at the tea. The steam curled up in lazy spirals. It smelled of chamomile and honey. But there was something else underneath. A faint bitterness that might have been the herbs, or might have been my own paranoia. "Thank you," I said. I made no move to pick it up. Elena remained standing. She crossed her arms, her gaze drifting toward the ceiling. "By the way, Dad, did you ever get around to fixing the alarm sensor in the attic? You mentioned last week it was giving you false positives." My heart skipped a beat. The question was dropped so casually, buried in small talk. But I knew instantly that this was the point of her visit. The tea was just a prop. This question was the payload. I looked at her face. She was trying to look bored, but her eyes were sharp, focused on my reaction. "No," I lied. I kept my face impassive. I got tired of the keypad beeping in the middle of the night. So I just bypassed that entire zone. The attic sensor is dead. I figured I would call the technician next week. I watched her reaction with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a specimen. It was subtle, a micro-expression that lasted less than a second. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. The tight line of her jaw relaxed. The corner of her mouth twitched upward. It was relief. Pure, unadulterated relief. "That is probably for the best," she said, her voice lighter now. "You do not want the police showing up for a false alarm at 3 in the morning, especially with all the break-ins lately. Best to just let it be for now." Break-ins. There had been no break-ins in our neighborhood for 5 years. She was building a narrative. She was laying the groundwork for a tragedy. "I need to use the restroom before I head out," she said. "Drink your tea. Dad, do not let it get cold." She turned and walked into the hallway. The powder room is on the ground floor. Just past the kitchen, I waited for the sound of the door clicking shut. It never came. I held my breath. My hearing is not what it used to be. But I know the acoustic signature of this house better than anyone I know. Which floorboards sing, and which ones remain silent. I heard footsteps, but they were not moving toward the bathroom. They were soft, deliberate steps moving toward the back of the hallway, toward the narrow alcove that houses the pull-down stairs to the attic. I closed my eyes and visualized the layout. The floorboard, right at the base of the attic access, is warped. It is a piece of original Douglas fir that bows slightly under pressure if you step on the center. It is silent if you step on the edge. It groans, creak. The sound was faint, muffled by the distance, but unmistakable. She was not using the bathroom. She was standing at the base of the attic stairs. Why was she checking to see if the door was sealed? Was she meeting someone? The woman's warning echoed in my mind. Check the attic. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the steam rising from the tea. My hands were gripping the armrest so hard, my fingers ached. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to storm into the hallway and demand to know what she was doing. But fear held me down. Not fear for myself, but fear of the truth. I did not want to know. God help me. A part of me wanted to drink that tea, fall asleep, and never wake up, just so I would not have to face the reality that my little girl was plotting something terrible. Minutes ticked by. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. Far too long for a simple check. What was she doing back there? Then, the footsteps returned. Quick, sharp clicks of heels on hardwood. She was hurrying now. Elena re-entered the living room. "I really have to run," she said, breathless. She was smoothing down the front of her blazer. I looked at her. I looked closely. Her hair, which had been perfectly sleek when she arrived, was now slightly frizzy with static on the right side. Her necklace was crooked, but it was her shoulder that made my stomach turn over. On the left shoulder of her black blazer, stark against the dark fabric, was a smudge of gray dust. It was not ordinary household lint. It was fibrous. It had a slight shimmer to it under the lamplight. I am a structural engineer. I know building materials. I know that in 1995. I insulated the attic with blown-in fiberglass insulation. It is a gray, woolly substance that clings to everything it touches. It causes itching if it gets on your skin. It is unmistakable. She had not just looked at the attic door. She had opened it, or someone had opened it for her. "You have something on your jacket," I said. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Elena froze. Her hand flew to her shoulder, brushing it frantically. "Oh, must be dust from the bathroom. That room is a mess. Dad, you really need to hire a cleaner." "Right," I said. "Dust." She grabbed her purse. She was eager to leave now. The energy coming off her was frantic, like an animal sensing a storm. "I will call you tomorrow," she said. She leaned in and kissed me on the forehead. Her lips were cold. There was no warmth in that touch, no affection. It felt like a seal, a final goodbye. "Sleep well, Dad," she whispered. "Make sure you finish that tea. It will help you sleep through the night." "Drive safely," I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from someone else. Someone far away. She turned and walked out the front door. I did not get up to walk her out. I listened to the heavy thud of the door closing, the click of the lock, and then the sound of her car engine starting. I listened as the tires crunched on the wet gravel and faded into the distance. I was alone. The silence of the house rushed back in, heavier than before. It pressed against my eardrums. I looked at the mug of tea on the side table. It was still warm. "Make sure you finish that tea." I picked up the mug. My hand was trembling. I brought it to my nose and sniffed it again. The chamomile was there, masking everything. Sweet and cloying. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and walked over to the large potted ficus tree in the corner of the room. "I am sorry," I whispered to the plant. I tipped the mug. The amber liquid poured into the dark soil. Disappearing instantly, I watched the last few drops fall from the rim. I did not drink it. I was awake, and my daughter had just left for school. The woman at the store, Clara. She had been right about the school. She had been right about Elena leaving, and now. There was only one instruction left: check the attic. I looked up at the ceiling above the plaster and the lath, above the joists and the wiring. Something was waiting for me. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on the room. My daughter had come into my house, verified that the alarm was off, tried to drug me, and left me alone with whatever was up there. I set the empty mug down on the table with a soft clink. The sound was like a starter pistol. The time for denial was over. The time for being a father was over tonight. I had to be an engineer again. I had to inspect the failure. I had to find the crack in the foundation before the whole house came down on top of me. I turned toward the hallway and the dark alcove where the attic stairs waited. I waited until the sound of Elena's car had completely faded into the wash of the rain before I moved. The silence she left behind was heavy, a suffocating blanket that seemed to press against the windows. I walked to the front door, my movements mechanical, and engaged the deadbolt. The steel tumblers slid into the strike plate with a heavy, final clunk. It was a sound I usually found comforting, a confirmation that the outside world was kept at bay tonight. However, it felt different. It felt like I was sealing myself inside a tomb. I did not stop there. I went to the back door, the one leading to the garden, and checked the lock. Then I moved to the side entrance near the garage locked. Secure, I moved through the ground floor, turning off every single light, the kitchen, the hallway. The living room plunged into darkness. I wanted the house to look empty from the street if anyone was watching from the outside. I wanted them to think the old man had gone to bed. But more importantly, darkness changes the acoustics of a space. It forces you to rely on your ears. Visual stimuli distract the brain, consuming processing power that should be dedicated to auditory analysis by eliminating the light. I was sharpening my hearing, turning my own home into a listening post. I stood in the center of the living room, standing perfectly still on the Persian rug to muffle the sound of my own breathing. I closed my eyes and listened. Every house has a rhythm, a respiration cycle born of physics and thermodynamics. I have lived in this Victorian for 30 years. I know its songs. I know that when the temperature drops, as it was doing tonight, the Douglas fir joists in the walls contract. This creates a specific, high-pitched popping sound, like a knuckle cracking, usually coming from the west wall, where the wind hits hardest. I know that the copper pipes in the hydronic heating system expand when the boiler kicks on, creating a rhythmic ticking sound, 3 ticks per second, fading as the water circulates. These are the sounds of a healthy structure settling into the night. They are predictable. They are safe. I waited, letting these familiar sounds wash over me, cataloging them, dismissing them, Pop. That was the west wall. Normal tick, tick, tick. That was the radiator in the dining room. Normal hiss. The rain against the chimney flue. Normal. Then, I heard it. It came from above, directly above the center of the living room ceiling. Cree-UK. It was a long, drawn-out groan of wood fibers, being compressed beyond their resting state. I opened my eyes and stared up at the dark plaster ceiling. My mind instantly switched into engineering mode, visualizing the structural layout of the floor above. Directly above the living room is the guest bedroom, but the sound had a specific resonance to it. It was deep. It did not sound like footsteps on the carpeted floor of the guest room. It sounded like weight shifting on bare, unfinished wood. It sounded like the attic joists. I held my breath. Was it the wind? No. The wind exerts a lateral load on the exterior sheathing. It pushes the house from the side, causing a generalized shearing stress that makes the whole frame moan softly. This was a vertical point load. This was a concentrated force applied to a specific 2x8 ceiling joist. Was it a rat? A raccoon? I ran the numbers in my head. A large raccoon weighs perhaps 20 pounds, if a 20-pound animal scurried across a beam. The vibration frequency would be rapid, a staccato patter. This sound was slow. It was the sound of a load being applied, held, and then released. It was the sound of weight transfer. Thump, a soft, muffled impact. Someone had shifted their stance. I calculated the deflection to cause a piece of old-growth timber to groan like that. The load had to be significant. We were not talking about 20 pounds. We were not talking about 50 pounds. Based on the pitch of the groan and the duration of the compression, I estimated the live load to be between 170 and 200 pounds. That is 80 to 90 kilograms of mass. That is the weight of a grown man. A cold sensation, sharper than the winter air, bloomed in my stomach. It was not just fear. It was a biological alarm, a primal signal that predates architecture and engineering. It was the prey sensing the predator. There was a man in my attic. My daughter had not just left me alone. She had left me with a roommate. I stood there for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The realization was paralyzing. If I had drunk that tea, if I had let the sedative take hold, I would be asleep in my armchair right now, and that weight above me would be coming down. I needed a weapon. I am not a violent man. I have never owned a gun. I believe in structural solutions, not ballistic ones. But I knew that a blueprint could not save me tonight. I moved silently toward the hall closet. The one underneath the main staircase. I knew exactly where to step to avoid the squeaky board near the entrance. I opened the closet door, careful to lift the handle slightly to prevent the hinge from squeaking. I reached into the darkness, my hand brushing past raincoats and old umbrellas until my fingers closed around cold, smooth aluminum. My old softball bat I had bought it 20 years ago for a company league. It was a 32-ounce aluminum bat, balanced and solid. It was designed to hit a leather ball 300 feet. But tonight, it was a lever. It was a force multiplier. In my other hand, I grabbed the heavy-duty Maglite flashlight I kept on the shelf for power outages. It was made of aircraft-grade aluminum, heavy enough to be a bludgeon in its own right. With a beam that could cut through smoke, I closed the closet door. I stood in the dark hallway, a bat in my right hand. A flashlight in my left. I felt ridiculous. I felt like a terrified old man playing pretend. But then, the floorboard above me creaked again. Closer to the hatch this time, the reality of the situation sharpened my focus. This was not a game. This was a structural failure of my entire life. And I was the only one left to shore it up. I looked at the staircase leading to the second floor. The stairs in this house are original oak. They are beautiful, but they are treacherous for the stealthy. Over a century. The treads have separated slightly from the risers if you step in the middle of the stair. The wood bows and rubs against the nail shank. creating a loud, dry squeak to ascend silently. You have to place your foot on the extreme outer edge of the tread, right against the wall stringer, where the wood is supported by the underlying carriage. That is the dead spot. I took a breath, held it, and began to climb. Step 1. I placed my weight on the far right edge. Silence. Step 2. My knee popped, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. But I kept moving. Step 3. Step 4. I moved with the agonizing slowness of a glacier. My eyes were fixed on the top of the landing. The darkness was absolute. But I knew the geography of my home. I knew that at the top of the stairs. I had to turn left to face the hallway. The attic hatch was located in the ceiling at the far end of that hallway, just outside the master bedroom, as I reached the midpoint of the stairs. The sound from above stopped. The intruder had stopped moving. Was he listening too? Could he hear the blood rushing in my ears? The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see who would make the first mistake. I reached the landing. I pressed my back against the wall, the plaster cool against my sweat-drenched shirt. I peered down the long, dark tunnel of the upstairs hallway. The attic hatch is a simple plywood panel, painted white to match the ceiling, trimmed with molding. It is a pull-down model. With a short cord hanging from it, I squinted through the gloom. My eyes had adjusted enough to make out shapes, shadows, and contrasts. Something was wrong with the hatch. I crept closer, keeping my back to the wall, sliding my feet rather than lifting them to distribute my weight evenly. I stopped 5 feet away from the hatch and raised the flashlight. But I did not turn it on, yet. I just used the lens to focus my gaze. There was a mark on the trim. The trim around the attic door is painted a high-gloss white. I painted it myself 3 years ago. It was pristine. But now, in the faint, ambient light filtering up from the street lamps outside, I could see a dark, jagged line on the wood. It was a scratch, a gouge. I moved an inch closer. It was a fresh abrasion. The paint had been chipped away, revealing the raw pine underneath. It looked like something metal had scraped against it, a belt buckle, a tool, or perhaps the zipper of a heavy jacket. And then I saw it. A tiny, almost invisible detail that stopped my heart cold, caught in the splintered wood of the trim, was a single, tiny tuft of gray fuzz. I remembered the shoulder of Elena's black blazer. I remembered the gray dust I had seen there. The dust she had dismissed as bathroom dirt, fiberglass insulation. The logic chain clicked into place with the precision of a steel trap. Elena had not just checked the door. She had pulled it down. She had extended the ladder. She had allowed someone to climb up there. The scratch was from their entry. The fiberglass on her shoulder was from when she helped push the hatch back up. Or perhaps when she embraced the man she had hidden in my ceiling. The betrayal hit me then, harder than any physical blow. It was a shearing force that tore through the center of my chest. My daughter, my little girl, whom I had taught to ride a bike, whom I had comforted when she scraped her knees, had stood right here in this hallway. She had looked at this hatch, knowing there was a man inside waiting to kill me. And then, she had gone downstairs to make me tea. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and stinging. But I blinked them away. There was no room for grief in the equation of survival. Grief is a collapse. Anger is a structure. I built a scaffold of rage to hold myself upright. I tightened my grip on the baseball bat. My knuckles were white. The aluminum felt like an extension of my arm. I was standing directly under the hatch now. I could hear breathing. It was faint, rhythmic, and wet. It was the sound of a large man trying to breathe quietly in a dusty, confined space. He was right there. Just 3/4 of an inch of plywood separated my head from his boots. I looked at the pull cord. It was swinging ever so slightly. A pendulum counting down the seconds of my life. I had the element of surprise. He thought I was asleep. He thought the drugs were working. He was waiting for the house to go silent so he could descend and finish the job. He was not expecting the prey to come looking for him. I shifted my stance, widening my base to generate maximum torque. I raised the bat to my shoulder. I positioned my thumb over the switch of the maglite. I took a deep, silent breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of the hallway. Force equals mass times acceleration. I reached up with my left hand, grabbed the pull cord, and prepared to bring the ceiling down. I gripped the nylon cord with my left hand, the rough texture biting into my palm. I did not give myself a moment to hesitate, to rethink, or to let the trembling in my legs travel up to my resolve. I yanked the cord downward with every ounce of strength I had left in my 68-year-old shoulders. The attic hatch gave way with a screech of rusted springs and dry wood. The folding ladder slid out of the ceiling cavity, extending toward the floor like a skeletal tongue. It hit the hardwood with a heavy thud that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. Dust, thick and gray, billowed down from the opening. A sudden cloud that smelled of dry rot and neglect. I clicked the switch on the maglite. The beam cut through the dust cloud, a solid bar of white light stabbing into the darkness above. "Who is there?" I shouted. My voice sounded ragged, aggressive, but underneath it, I could hear the tremor of fear. There was no answer, just the silence of the house, which felt heavier now, charged with a kinetic energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. I adjusted my grip on the aluminum bat, choking up on the handle for better control in tight quarters. I placed my foot on the first rung of the ladder. It creaked under my weight. I ascended, keeping my head low. The flashlight held away from my body, a trick a police officer friend had taught me once. If someone shoots at the light, you do not want the light to be in front of your chest. My head rose above the level of the ceiling joists, and I entered the attic. The first thing that hit me was the heat, even on a cold, rainy November night. The trapped air up here was stifling, heavy with the scent of fiberglass and baked timber. But underneath the smell of the house itself, there was something else, a scent that did not belong. It was sharp, metallic, and chemical. I recognized it instantly from my days inspecting machinery on job sites. It was the smell of high-grade machine oil, the kind used to lubricate precision moving parts, and beneath that, the faint, sour tang of human sweat, old sweat, unwashed clothes, the musk of a man who had been waiting in the dark for a long time. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the space. The attic was a cavern of shadows and shapes. The roof trusses formed a complex web of triangles, casting long, jagged shadows against the plywood sheathing of the roof. The floor was a sea of gray, blown-in insulation, looking like dirty snowdrifts, interrupted only by the narrow wooden catwalk I had installed down the center. "Come out," I said. "I know you are here." Silence. But it was not an empty silence. It was the held breath of a predator. I climbed fully into the attic. Standing carefully on the central catwalk, the ceiling was low here. Forcing me to crouch, I felt exposed, vulnerable. I swung the light to the left, toward the eaves. Nothing but insulation and the silver snake of a flexible duct. I swung it to the right. Nothing. Then, I looked down at the snow. The insulation in an undisturbed attic should be smooth, a uniform blanket of gray fluff. But here, about 3 feet from the hatch, the blanket was torn. Footprints. They were deep, brutal depressions in the fiberglass. They were not the prints of a casual visitor. These were huge, size 13 or 14, heavy tread work boots. I could see the lug pattern clearly stamped into the gray wool. They led away from the hatch, moving with purpose toward the far corner of the attic, behind the massive, foil-wrapped block of the main HVAC unit. I followed them. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Thump, 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 so loud I was sure he could hear it. I moved along the catwalk, placing my feet carefully if I stepped off the wood. My foot would punch right through the drywall ceiling of the bedroom below. I reached the HVAC unit. The metal was cold to the touch, the footprints hooked around the back of it. Into a blind spot created by the junction of the furnace and the chimney chase, I raised the bat. My muscles coiled tight. I took a breath and whipped around the corner. The flashlight beam leading the way, freeze. I yelled. The space behind the unit was empty. I let out a breath that was half gasp, half sob. But then the light caught something on the floor. It was a backpack, a black, tactical-style bag, sitting neatly on a piece of plywood that had been laid across the joists. It was not mine. It was clean, efficient, and military. I knelt down, keeping the light trained on the dark corners of the attic. Checking my periphery, I unzipped the main compartment of the bag with one hand, keeping the bat ready in the other. What I saw inside made my blood turn to ice water. This was not a burglar's kit. There were no crowbars, no jewelry bags, no screwdrivers for prying open safes. Inside the bag was a coil of thick black rope, a roll of heavy-duty duct tape, and a small, padded pelican case. I flipped the latch on the case and opened it inside. Nestled in custom-cut foam were 3 glass vials and a syringe. The labels on the vials were small, medical, precise. I squinted to read them. Succinylcholine. I am an engineer, not a doctor, but I know what that is. It is a paralytic. It stops your breathing. It leaves no mark. It mimics a heart attack or respiratory failure. My stomach lurched. This was not a robbery. This was a hit. This was a murder kit designed to make my death look like a tragedy of old age. Poor James. They would say his heart just gave out in his sleep. I looked deeper into the bag. There was a cell phone, a burner, cheap plastic, and a piece of paper. I pulled it out. It was a floor plan of my house. My house. But it was not the original blueprint. It was a hand-drawn sketch, detailed with terrifying accuracy. The alarm sensors were marked with red X's, the camera angles were noted, and there, next to the master bedroom, a note scrawled in handwriting I recognized. He sleeps on the left side. Heavy sleeper after tea, Elena's handwriting. The loop of the L, the sharp cross of the T. I had seen that handwriting on birthday cards, on report cards, on the thesis she dedicated to me now. It was on my death warrant. I dropped the paper, as if it were burning my skin. I felt sick, physically sick. As the magnitude of the betrayal washed over me, she had not just unlocked the door. She had choreographed the whole thing, the tea. The questions about the alarm. She had set the stage for my execution. I stood up. Backing away from the bag, I needed to get out. I needed to call the police. I turned to head back to the hatch, sweeping the light across the wall near the chimney. The beam caught a small, red light, blinking in the darkness. I froze. I moved closer. Mounted on the side of the smoke detector, a hard-wired unit I had installed 10 years ago, was a small black box. No bigger than a deck of cards, wires ran from it, spliced directly into the detector's circuitry. The red light pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. It was a bypass unit, a signal interrupter. It was telling the main alarm panel downstairs that everything was fine, even if this detector sensed smoke, or heat, or movement. The level of sophistication was terrifying. This man, whoever he was, knew electronics. He knew security systems. He was a professional, and he was still here. The realization hit me a split second before the sound did. The footprints had led behind the HVAC unit, but they hadn't come back. There was nowhere else to go in that corner. Unless I looked up above the HVAC unit. The roofline peaked. There was a small, shadowed recess behind the brick chimney stack, a space barely big enough for a child, or a man willing to curl himself into a ball. A sound came from the darkness behind the chimney, the sound of fabric rustling against brick. "You found the bag," a voice rasped. It was deep, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. "Curious old man," I spun around. Bringing the flashlight up, he launched himself from the shadows like a panther. He was huge in the chaotic strobe of my flashlight. He looked like a monster constructed of shadows. He was dressed entirely in black cargo pants, a black tactical sweater, and a black balaclava that covered everything but his eyes. Those eyes were cold, dead things, narrowing against the glare of my light. He was airborne, clearing the HVAC unit in a single bound, landing heavily on the catwalk 6 feet in front of me. The impact shook the floor joists. He didn't pause. He lunged in his right hand. A knife glinted. It was not a kitchen knife. It was a military-grade combat knife. With a serrated spine and a matte black finish, he held it with a reverse grip, blade down, ready to gut me. "Time to sleep, Grandpa," he grunted, slashing the knife in a vicious horizontal arc aimed at my throat. I should have died then, by all accounts. A 68-year-old retired engineer should not be able to dodge a professional killer. But 40 years on construction sites teach you things. They teach you to watch for falling steel. They teach you that, when a cable snaps, you move before you hear the sound. My body reacted before my brain could process the threat. I dropped my center of gravity, my knees buckling as I threw myself backward. The blade hissed through the air, missing my windpipe by less than an inch. I felt the wind of its passage against my neck. He overcommitted. The force of his swing carried him forward. Off balance, he stepped onto the insulation to catch himself, and his heavy boot punched through the drywall ceiling. He stumbled, his leg sinking into the floor up to his knee. "Damn it!" he roared. I did not hesitate. I did not think about mercy. I did not think about the law. I thought about the syringe in that bag. I thought about Elena's handwriting. I swung the aluminum bat with everything I had. I did not aim for his head. I aimed for the hand holding the knife. It was a calculation of leverage and bone density. Clang. The sound of the aluminum bat connecting with his wrist was sickeningly loud. Like a gunshot in the confined space, I felt the vibration rattle all the way up my arms to my teeth. He screamed a raw, guttural sound of shock and pain. The knife flew from his hand. Spinning away into the darkness of the eaves, he scrambled to pull his leg out of the hole in the ceiling, his eyes wild with rage. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw doubt. He had expected a frail victim. He had found a cornered animal. "You are dead," he spat, wrenching his leg free in a shower of gypsum dust and pink fiberglass. He lunged again, reaching for me with his good hand. His fingers hooked like claws. I swung the bat again, this time thrusting the end of it like a spear into his solar plexus. It connected solidly. The air rushed out of his lungs in a wet whoosh. He doubled over, gasping, coughing. I knew I could not win a prolonged fight. He was younger, stronger, and despite the pain, he was getting ready to kill me with his bare hands. I had one advantage: gravity. I turned and scrambled for the hatch. I threw myself onto the ladder, sliding down more than climbing, my feet missing rungs, my shins scraping against the metal. "Get back here," he roared from above. I heard his heavy boots stomping on the catwalk. Closing the distance, I hit the hallway floor and stumbled back. I looked up. His hand, a massive, gloved hand, was reaching down through the opening. Grasping for the frame of the ladder, I grabbed the bottom section of the ladder and shoved it upward. It telescoped into itself with a clatter. He yelled as the sliding metal pinched his fingers, and he jerked his hand back. I grabbed the pull cord and the edge of the plywood panel. I threw my weight against it, swinging the hatch upward just as the door was closing. I saw his face appear in the gap. The ski mask had pulled up slightly, revealing a mouth twisted in a snarl of pure hatred. "This isn't over, old man," he screamed. I slammed the hatch shut. Bang! I reached up and threw the hook latch, locking it. It was a flimsy piece of hardware, a simple metal hook and eyelet that I had installed to keep the draft out. It would not hold him for long. Thump, thump, thump. He was pounding on the plywood from above. The entire ceiling shook. Dust rained down on my head. "Open it," he screamed. The voice was muffled now, but no less terrified. I backed away, chest heaving, Clutching the bat to my chest, I was safe for the moment. But I was trapped in my own house with a monster in the ceiling. And the only person who had a key to the front door was the one who had sent him. I needed to move. The latch rattled violently as he kicked it from above. The wood around the screw was already beginning to splinter. I turned and ran for the stairs. The sound of wood splintering is distinct. It does not sound like a snap or a crack. It sounds like a scream above me. The plywood hatch was screaming every time the man's heavy boot slammed against it from inside the attic. The latch I had installed held for a fraction of a second before the screw tore another millimeter through the soft pine trim. Thump dust rained down on the hallway floor. Thump. The hook was bending. I could see the metal glistening under the stress, distorting from a U shape into a flat line. I am a structural engineer. I have spent my life calculating the failure points of materials. I looked at that latch, at the cheap hardware store screws holding it in place, and I did the math instantly. It was a terrifying calculus. A standard interior screw has a shear strength of maybe 80 pounds. The wood trim was decorative, not structural. The man above me weighed over 200 pounds, and he was stomping with the full force of gravity and rage. The latch had 2 minutes, maybe less. 2 minutes before the ceiling opened up and the monster dropped down. I did not waste a single second staring at the inevitable failure. I turned and ran. Running at 68 is not like running at 20. My knees protested with sharp stabs of pain, and my breath came in ragged. Burning gasps, I threw myself down the main staircase. My hand sliding along the banister so fast the friction burned my palm. I skipped the squeaky steps by instinct, landing heavily on the landing and pivoting toward the ground floor. My first impulse, the biological impulse of a terrified animal, was to run for the front door. I wanted to tear it open, sprint out into the rain, and scream for the neighbors. I wanted to be anywhere but inside this box. My hand was reaching for the deadbolt when I stopped. My fingers hovered inches from the brass lock. Think, James, think. If this was a simple burglary, running would save me. But this was not a burglary. This was a hit. A professional contract. The man in the attic had a radio jammer. He had a kill kit. He had a getaway plan. Professionals do not work without a safety net. I thought about the movies I had seen. Yes. But more importantly, I thought about the logistics of an operation like this. You do not send a man into a house without a lookout. There was a car outside. Maybe the silver sedan Elena had arrived in. Or maybe another vehicle parked down the street with its lights off. If I ran out that front door, I would be silhouetted against the street lights. I would be a target moving through open ground. I would be running straight into the arms of the driver. The front door was a fatal funnel. The back door led to a fenced yard with no easy exit if I went outside. I was dead inside, I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. Stay inside. You know the terrain, he does not. I backed away from the door. I retreated into the kitchen. The house was pitch black, save for the faint ambient light filtering in from the street, casting long, skeletal shadows across the linoleum floor. I needed help. Real help. I reached for the wall phone in the kitchen. The old landline I had kept for emergencies. I lifted the receiver. Silence. No dial tone, no static, just the dead, heavy silence of a severed connection. Of course, he had cut the line outside before he climbed into the attic. It was standard procedure. I fumbled in my pocket for my cell phone. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped it. I brought the screen up. The blue light was blinding in the darkness. I shielded it with my palm. Terrified that the glow would give away my position, I did not dial 911. It takes time to explain your situation to a dispatcher. It takes time for them to route the call. It takes time for a patrol car to finish its coffee and drive over, and when they arrive, they knock on the door and ask if everything is okay. I did not have time for questions. I needed a weapon. I scrolled through my contacts to R. Roy Miller, was a man I had played poker with for 15 years. He was 70 years old now, retired like me. But for 30 years, he had been the head of the Seattle Police Department's SWAT team. He was a man who slept with a revolver on his nightstand and woke up at 5 in the morning to run 3 miles. He lived 4 blocks away. I pressed the call button. Ring. Come on. Roy, pickup ring. Above me. There was a deafening crack, the sound of wood splintering completely. The hatch had given way. Thump. A heavy body hit the floor of the upstairs hallway. The house shuddered. He was out of the attic. He was on the 2nd floor. Yeah, James. Roy's voice was groggy, rough with sleep. It is late. You forget how to play a full house. Roy, listen to me, I hissed into the phone, pressing my back against the refrigerator. Code red. I have a hostile in my house. Armed professional. He just came through my attic. The change in Roy's voice was instantaneous. The grogginess vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp steeliness. Where are you? Kitchen, ground floor. He is on the 2nd floor, Roy. He has a syringe. He is here to kill me. I took a breath. The hardest words coming next. Elena is involved. My daughter set it up. There was a pause, a split second of processing. I am on my way. Do not go outside. Lock yourself down. I will be there in 4 minutes. The line went dead. 4 minutes. 240 seconds. It sounded like nothing. It sounded like an eternity. I heard footsteps above me. Heavy. Angry boots stomping on the hardwood. He was not being stealthy anymore. He had lost the element of surprise. Now he was just hunting. He was moving room to room, checking the bedrooms. He was clearing the 2nd floor before coming down. I had to hide. But where? Under a bed in a closet? No. Those are the first places they look. I needed a fortress. My eyes darted to the door at the far end of the kitchen. The basement. I had finished the basement 10 years ago. It was my workshop, my sanctuary. But specifically, the utility room in the back corner was where I kept my gun safe, empty now. Unfortunately, and my expensive tools, because of the value of the equipment. I had installed a solid steel fire door with a reinforced frame and a commercial-grade deadbolt. It was the strongest point in the house. I moved. I stayed low, creeping across the kitchen floor. The footsteps above stopped. He was listening. I froze, 1 foot in the air, balancing like a statue. Silence. Then, the footsteps started again, moving toward the stairs. He was coming down. I scrambled for the basement door. I opened it, slipped inside, and closed it softly. I did not lock it yet. The click of the lock would echo. I moved down the wooden steps into the subterranean darkness of the basement. The air down here was cool and smelled of sawdust and oil. It was familiar. It was my domain. I navigated the darkness by memory. Workbench on the left table, saw in the center. Storage racks on the right. I moved toward the back corner. Toward the utility room. I reached the steel door. I slipped inside. This room was small. It was maybe 6 feet by 8 feet. It housed the furnace, the water heater, and my tool cabinets. It was a concrete box. I closed the steel door. I turned the thumb turn on the deadbolt. Click. The sound was sharp, metallic. Upstairs. The footsteps paused. He had heard it. I backed away from the door, sliding down the wall until I was sitting on the cold concrete floor. I was trapped. I had cornered myself. But I had also bought time. That door would take a battering ram to open. Or a shotgun. I listened. The footsteps moved across the kitchen floor above my head. They were slower now, deliberate. He was tracking the sound. He knew I had gone down. I heard the basement door at the top of the stairs open. Creak then. The heavy tread of boots on the basement stairs. 1, 2, 3. He was coming down. My heart was beating so hard. It felt like a physical blow against my chest. I clutched the baseball bat across my lap. Though I knew that if he got through that steel door, a bat would be useless. I looked at my phone. 2 minutes had passed. Roy was halfway here. I needed to stall him. I needed to make him hesitate. I needed to confuse the narrative. If Elena was the client, she was the one pulling the strings. She was the one waiting for the confirmation text. I pulled up my text messages. My hands were shaking violently, my thumbs slipping on the glass screen. I opened the thread with Elena. The last message from her was from an hour ago. Love you. Dad. Sleep tight. The lie burned my eyes. I typed a response I had to sound like the victim she wanted me to be. I had to sound like the plan was working. Dad is feeling very tired. Sweetie, the tea was good. Going to sleep now, do not call. I need the rest. I stared at the message. It was a gamble, a massive, desperate gamble. If she read this, she might think the killer hadn't struck yet. She might think the drugs were working. She might text him to hold off, to make it look natural, or she might realize something was wrong. But it was the only card I had left to play. I hit send. Delivered. I put the phone face down on the concrete floor to hide the light. Outside the steel door, the footsteps had reached the bottom of the stairs. He was in the basement with me. I held my breath. I could hear him breathing again. Ragged and angry, I could hear the soft snick of metal against metal. Maybe he was reloading a weapon. Or maybe he was pulling out another knife. He walked past the workbench. He kicked over a stack of paint cans. Clatter bang. He was angry. He was frustrated. He couldn't find me in the open. He was moving toward the utility room. I gripped the bat. I pressed my ear against the cold steel of the door. I was 68 years old. I was a father. I was a widower. And tonight, I was a soldier in a war I never asked for. I waited for the handle to turn. 10 minutes is a unit of time that is relative. When you are watching a movie, 10 minutes is a scene when you are waiting for water to boil. It is a nuisance. But when you are sitting on the cold concrete floor of a utility room with a homicidal maniac trying to batter down the door, 10 minutes is a geological era. It is an eternity, measured in the terrifying rhythm of impacts. Bang. The steel door shuddered in its frame. Dust sifted down from the ceiling joint. "Open the door, old man!" the voice roared from the other side. It was raw now, stripped of the earlier mockery. It was the voice of a man who knew his timeline was collapsing. "I will burn this whole house down with you in it." Bang. I flinched with every blow. Curling tighter around my baseball bat, I stared at the deadbolt. The reinforced strike plate was holding. I had installed it myself. Using 3-inch screws that bit deep into the stud, I mentally thanked the younger version of myself who had been so paranoid about security. That paranoia was the only thing keeping me alive right now. I looked at my phone. 3 minutes since I called Roy Bang. "You think the cops can save you," he screamed. He kicked the door this time. A heavy, dull thud. "I will be gone before they even find the street." He was lying. I could hear the panic in his voice. He was losing control. A professional killer relies on precision and silence. This had become a brawl. A messy, loud, chaotic brawl. Then it happened. From the high, narrow window near the ceiling of the basement, the one that looked out at ground level onto the driveway, a flash of light swept across the darkness. Blue, red, blue, red. The colors danced across the furnace ducts and water pipes. A silent disco of salvation. And then came the sound. Whoop, whoop, the siren cut through the night air like a buzzsaw. It was loud, close, and aggressive. Not a distant wail. But right outside the front door, the pounding on the door stopped instantly. Silence. I heard a sharp intake of breath from the other side of the door. Then, footsteps. Fast. Frantic footsteps running away from the utility room. He was bolting. He was running back toward the stairs. I scrambled to my knees. Pressing my ear to the door, I heard him stumble on the bottom step, cursing. Then the heavy thud of boots sprinting up the wooden staircase, crash above me, on the ground floor. The sound of the front door being kicked in, not by him, by someone coming in. "Police, get on the ground now." The voice was amplified, booming. It was not Roy. It was a SWAT officer. Drop it. Drop the weapon. Back off, the killer screamed. His voice was distant now, coming from the hallway or the living room. Pop, pop, pop. 3 gunshots. Sharp. Dry cracks that sounded nothing like the movies. They were followed immediately by a heavy, wet thud, like a sack of cement being dropped from a height. Suspect down, suspect down. Secure the room, clear left, clear right. Hands, let me see your hands. The shouting was a chaotic symphony of controlled violence. I stayed frozen on the floor, trembling uncontrollably, now that the adrenaline was crashing. Then, silence, a heavy, ringing silence. I waited 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then, heavy footsteps approached the basement stairs. These were not the frantic stomps of the killer. These were measured. Tactical steps, James. The voice was gravelly, familiar, and the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Roy, I croaked. My voice was barely a whisper. I cleared my throat and tried again. Roy, I am down here, utility room. Coming down, Roy called out. Stay put. Do not open the door until I tell you. I heard him descend the stairs. I heard him walk across the concrete floor. He stopped right outside the door. James, it is Roy, I am alone. Open up. I scrambled to my feet. My legs numb and stiff. I fumbled with the deadbolt. My fingers were so slippery with sweat, I could barely grip the thumb turn. Finally, it clicked. I pushed the heavy steel door open. Roy Miller stood there. He was wearing a tactical vest over his pajamas. A Glock 17 in his hand held at the low ready position. His face was grim, lined with the stress of a man who had seen too much. But his eyes were warm. You look like hell, Jimmy, he said softly. I must have looked it covered in dust, sweating, clutching a baseball bat like a lifeline. I dropped the bat. It clattered loudly on the concrete. Is he? I couldn't finish the sentence. He is down. Roy said. He holstered his weapon and reached out, gripping my shoulder firmly. You are safe. Come on, let's get you out of this hole. He led me up the stairs. My legs felt like rubber. I had to lean on the railing to keep from falling. The living room was a scene of controlled chaos. Furniture was overturned. Muddy boot prints were everywhere. Several uniformed officers were moving around, stringing up yellow tape. A team of paramedics was working in the center of the room. Lying on the floor, near the fireplace, was the man in black. He was writhing in pain, handcuffed, with a paramedic applying pressure to a gunshot wound in his thigh. He was huge, easily 6'4", with arms as thick as tree trunks covered in prison tattoos. His ski mask had been pulled off. His face was a roadmap of violent scars, a broken nose, and eyes that burned with a feral hatred. That is Marcus the Butcher Boyle, Roy said, looking down at the man with disgust. Freelance hitman Interpol has a red notice on him. He usually operates out of Chicago. Someone paid a lot of money to bring him to Seattle. Boyle looked up at us. He spat a glob of blood onto my Persian rug. Screw you, cops, he growled. Shut up, Marcus, Roy said calmly. He turned to one of the officers. Bag his phone, bag everything. An officer handed Roy a plastic evidence bag. Inside was the cheap burner phone I had seen in the attic. It just buzzed, sir, the officer said. New message. Roy looked at the phone through the plastic. His expression hardened. He looked at me. Then, back at the phone, he hesitated. What is it? I asked. The dread was coming back, cold and heavy in my stomach. James, Roy started, his voice gentle. You do not need to see this right now. Show me, I said. My voice was steady. I needed to know. I needed to see the architecture of the betrayal. Roy sighed and held up the bag. The screen was lit up. A new text message had just arrived. Is the old man dead? Yet I am coming back to confirm the scene. Do not screw this up. I stared at the words. They were simple words, cruel words. But it was the sender, ID, that shattered me. The number was saved in the contact list as client. Roy tapped the screen to show the number details. It was a 206 area code. I knew that number. I had dialed it thousands of times. I had dialed it to sing happy birthday. I had dialed it to ask if she needed money for books. I had dialed it just to hear her voice. 206-555-0199 Elena. The world did not spin. It did not go black instead. Everything snapped into hyperfocus. I saw the dust motes dancing in the police lights. I saw the blood on the carpet. I saw the hate in the hitman's eyes. And I saw the truth. My daughter. My flesh and blood. The little girl I had carried on my shoulders at the zoo. The woman I had been so proud of. She was not just involved. She was the architect. She was the client. She was driving back here right now. Not to comfort me. Not to check on me. But to confirm the scene. She was coming to make sure her father was a corpse. A sound escaped my throat. It was not a sob. It was a dry, broken gasp. Like a beam snapping under a load it could no longer bear. "She wants me dead," I whispered. The words tasted like ash. "My own daughter wants me dead." Roy gripped my shoulder tighter. "I am sorry, James. I am so sorry." I looked at the hitman. He was grinning now. A bloody, twisted smile. "Family right," he rasped. "Can't live with him, can't kill him without hiring a pro. Get him out of here." Roy barked at the officers. "Now." They hauled Boyle to his feet and dragged him out the door. I stood alone in the wreckage of my living room. The physical threat was gone. The man with the knife was in handcuffs. But the structural damage to my life was total. The foundation had crumbled. The roof had collapsed. I looked at Roy. "What do we do?" Roy looked at the phone again. "She is coming back," he said, his voice dropping to a professional, conspiratorial tone. "She thinks Boyle is still in charge. She thinks you are dead." He looked me in the eye. "We have a choice, James. We can arrest her when she pulls into the driveway or—" He paused. "Or what?" I asked. "Or we let her see what she came to see." Roy said grimly. "We catch her in the act. We make sure she can never lie her way out of this. We make sure the jury sees her face when she thinks she has won." I understood. He was offering me a trap. A way to catch the predator. I thought about the tea. I thought about the fake concern. I thought about the text message, "Love you, Dad." The love was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Do it." I said, "Let's set the stage." The interrogation room at the precinct was a box of sterile light in the stale air. Smelling of burnt coffee and floor wax, I sat in the observation room on the other side of the one-way mirror. Wrapped in a gray wool blanket that a kind female officer had draped over my shoulders. My hands were clean now. I had washed the dust and grime off in the bathroom sink. But they still felt dirty. They felt stained with the knowledge of what I had just survived through the glass. I watched Marcus Boyle. The butcher. He was handcuffed to a metal table, his leg bandaged where the police round had grazed him. He did not look like a monster anymore, without his ski mask. Stripped of the shadows of my attic, he just looked like a thug, a large, violent, broken man who viewed murder as a line item on an invoice. Sitting across from him was Roy, and next to Roy was a younger detective, a specialist in financial crimes named Detective Harrow. "I am telling you, I was just the mechanic." Boyle said, his voice was muffled through the speaker system. But the arrogance was still there. "You want the architect, you talk to the lady." "We are talking to you, Marcus," Roy said calmly. "And you are going to tell us exactly how this was supposed to go down, if you want to avoid the needle. You give us everything." Boyle shrugged. "Simple job, in and out, no marks." She said the old man had a bad heart anyway. Said nobody would question it. I flinched. The old man, bad heart. Detective Harrow stood up and walked out of the interrogation room. Coming into the observation booth where I sat, he was carrying a thick file folder. He looked at me with an expression that was a mix of pity and professional detachment. "Mr. Davis," Harrow said, sitting down beside me. I need you to look at this. We pulled your daughter's financial records. We got a warrant about 20 minutes ago based on the text messages." "Is it bad?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow, like wind blowing through an empty tunnel. "It is catastrophic." Harrow said he opened the file. "Your daughter, Elena, is not just a university lecturer. For the last 3 years, she has been living a double life." He laid out the spreadsheets, rows and columns of red ink. "She started with online poker," Harrow explained, pointing to a series of transactions, small stakes at first. Then she moved to high-leverage sports betting when that went south. She tried to recoup her losses with cryptocurrency futures. She was gambling on margin, Mr. Davis. She was betting money she did not have. I stared at the numbers. They were just digits, but they represented the erosion of my daughter's soul. "How much?" I asked. "As of this morning," Harrow said, looking at the bottom line. "She owes $2.1 million to a syndicate operating out of Macau, and these are not banks, Mr. Davis. These are loan sharks, the kind who do not send foreclosure notices. They send people like Marcus Boyle." $2 million. The number was abstract, impossible. Elena drove a 5-year-old car. She wore sensible clothes. She lived in a modest apartment near the campus. "Where did the money go?" I whispered. "It vanished into the ether of the internet." Harrow said, "But here is the kicker. The syndicate gave her a deadline, 48 hours pay up, or they would come for her." He flipped the page to a document that looked familiar. It was a copy of my life insurance policy. She is the sole beneficiary. Harrow said, $3 million plus the house. "We had an appraiser look at your property records, ideally located, historic zoning, even in a quick sale. That house is worth another $1.5 million. The math was brutal in its simplicity. Elena's debt, $2 million. My death, $4.5 million. I was not a father to her. I was an asset. I was a ledger entry that needed to be liquidated to balance the books. She did not just want the money," I said. Realizing the horror of it, she needed it to survive. "She was desperate," Harrow agreed, "but desperation does not excuse matricide." Roy walked into the observation room. He looked tired. "Boyle just gave us the timeline," he said. "It matches the physical evidence." Roy sat down on the other side of me. "Here is how they planned it. James, you need to hear this." I nodded. "Tell me." "Elena gave Boyle the spare key to the back door 3 days ago," Roy said. "He entered the house around 4 in the afternoon. While you were at the grocery store, he set up the jammer on the smoke detector. He prepped the attic." "Wait," I said, my mind flashing back, the hatch, the dust. "Exactly." Roy said Boyle said he was waiting up there, but he needed a signal that the coast was clear to come down. The plan was for Elena to come over, drug you, and then give him the all-clear. The tea. I said, "She was so insistent that I drink the tea." "We tested the residue in the mug you dumped in the plant pot." Roy said, "It was loaded with diazepam Valium, enough to knock out a horse if you had finished that cup. You would have been unconscious in 15 minutes. And then Boyle comes down," Roy continued, his voice grim. "He injects you with the succinylcholine. It paralyzes the diaphragm. You stop breathing. You suffocate. But it looks like heart failure. No struggle, no bruises. Just an old man dying in his armchair." "But the dust," I insisted. "Why was there dust on her shoulder?" Roy hesitated. "Boyle told us that right before she came down to the living room to make the tea." She went to the hallway. She pulled the hatch down just a few inches. She whispered to him. She asked him if he was ready. I closed my eyes. I could see it. I could see my daughter standing in the hallway, looking up into the darkness, where a killer was crouching. She wasn't checking the insulation. She was checking the weapon. The dust on her shoulder fell when she pushed the hatch back up. She hugged me, I whispered. She kissed my forehead. She told me to sleep well. "She was saying goodbye," Roy said softly, "in her mind." You were already dead. The pain was a physical thing, a heavy, jagged stone in my gut. I thought about the little girl who used to cry when her goldfish died. I thought about the woman who brought me soup when I had the flu. Where had she gone? When had the gambling and the fear eaten her alive and left this husk behind? James, Roy said. Breaking through my grief, we have a problem. What problem? Elena is coming back. Roy said. She sent that text to Boyle's phone asking if it was done. We have not replied yet. She is coming to check. I said, she does not trust Boyle. She is coming to stage the body, Roy corrected. Boyle said part of the deal was that she had to make the 911 call. She has to play the grieving daughter to sell it to the paramedics. Tears, screaming, the whole performance. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. We can arrest her the moment she pulls into the driveway. Roy said, we have the texts. We have Boyle's confession. It is enough for a conspiracy charge. But, I asked, I heard the hesitation in his voice. But conspiracy can be fought in court. Roy said, she gets a good lawyer. She claims she was coerced. She claims she didn't know Boyle was going to kill you. Just scare you. It gets messy. We want murder one. We want life without parole. So, what do you need? I asked. Roy looked at me. We need to catch her in the act. We need her to walk into that room, see you dead, and verify it. We need her to think she has won. We need the confession she will make to an empty room before she dials 911. I understood what he was asking. It was the hardest thing anyone had ever asked me to do. You want me to go back to the house, I said. You want me to lie on the floor and play dead for my daughter. We will have wires on you, Roy said. Cameras hidden in the bookshelves, tactical team in the kitchen. In the closets, you will be safe. James, I promise you. But we need to see her reaction. We need the jury to see her check your pulse and smile. I looked through the glass at Boyle. He was leaning back in his chair now, looking bored. He didn't care to him. It was just a job that went bad, but to me, it was the end of my bloodline. I thought about the woman in the grocery store, Clara. Your life depends on it. She had saved my physical life now. I had to save my soul by ensuring that the person who tried to take it could never hurt anyone else again. If I let Elena get away with a lesser charge, if she walked free in 10 years, she would still be an addict. She would still be desperate. Who would be next? A husband. A child. I was an engineer. When a structure is compromised. When the rot has eaten through the load-bearing beams. You do not patch it. You condemn it. You bring it down before it falls on innocent people. Elena was compromised. She was dangerous, and I was the only one who could bring her down. Okay, I said. I stood up. My legs were steady now. The trembling had stopped, replaced by a cold. Clinical resolve. James, you do not have to do this. Detective Harrow said, we can make the arrest now. No, I said. She wanted a tragedy. She wanted a scene. I will give her one. I looked at Roy. Take me home. I said, let's set the stage. Roy nodded. He pulled a radio from his belt. All units. We are moving to Phase 2 transport. The victim back to the residence. Silence on all frequencies. Prepare for a sting operation. We walked out of the station into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing, revealing a few faint stars. It was a beautiful night for a funeral as we drove back to the house, my fortress, my crime scene. Roy briefed me on the specifics. Lie on your back. He instructed, near the armchair, arm draped to the side, eyes closed, breath shallow. Do not move, do not react. She will check your pulse. She knows how to check for a carotid pulse. She took a first aid class, remember. I remember, I said. I paid for the class. When she touches you, Roy said, it is going to be hard not to flinch, but you have to stay limp. She needs to believe the succinylcholine worked. She thinks you are paralyzed, suffocated. I can do it, I said. We pulled onto Birch Street. The police cars were gone, the lights were off. The house looked dark and silent, exactly as it would if an old man had died quietly in his sleep. We went inside through the back door. The forensic team had already set up the hidden cameras, tiny lenses, no bigger than a pinhead, concealed in the spine of a book. In the eye of a decorative owl statue, we have audio and video rolling. A technician whispered. I walked into the living room. The rug had been swapped out for a clean one. They didn't want her to see Boyle's blood. The furniture was righted. The broken tea mug was gone. Ready, James. Roy asked. I looked around the room. This was where I had read her bedtime stories. This was where we had opened Christmas presents. This was where she had told me she got into graduate school. I lay down on the floor. Positioning myself between the armchair and the fireplace, I sprawled my limbs. Trying to mimic the unnatural relaxation of death, I tilted my head back, mouth slightly open. The floor was hard and cold. Perfect. Roy said. He sounded far away. Everybody. Positions. Hiding spots now. The room emptied. Roy stepped into the hallway closet. The other officers vanished into the kitchen and the downstairs bathroom. I was alone on the floor. She is turning onto the street. Roy's voice came through a tiny earpiece they had placed deep in my ear canal. 2 minutes out. I closed my eyes. I slowed my breathing. In, out, I focused on the darkness behind my eyelids. I tried to empty my mind of the sorrow, the rage, the confusion. I tried to become an object, a corpse. She is in the driveway, Roy whispered. Engine off. She is coming to the door. I heard the key scratch against the lock, the same key I had given her when she was 16. Click. The door opened. A draft of cold air swept across the floor, chilling my skin. Footsteps. Soft, hesitant at first, then more confident. Hello, she called out. Her voice was trembling, but I could hear the theatricality in it. It was a performance for an empty house. Dad, are you awake? She walked into the living room. I lay perfectly still. I did not breathe. I did not twitch. She stopped. Dad. She was standing right over me. I could smell her perfume. Chanel No. 5. The scent of betrayal. She knelt down, her knees cracked slightly. Dad, she whispered. And then, I felt it. Her hand, her warm, living hand touched my neck. Her fingers pressed against my carotid artery. I willed my heart to stop, or at least to slow down. I forced my muscles to remain liquid. She held her fingers there for 10 seconds. Then, she pulled her hand away. And then, in the silence of the room, I heard a sound that will haunt me until the day I actually die. It was a sigh, a long, exhaling sigh, and then a giggle, a soft, relieved, giddy giggle. Finally, she whispered, problem solved. She stood up. I heard the rustle of fabric as she pulled her phone out. Okay, she muttered to herself, rehearsing her lines. Oh my God, Daddy okay? Breathe tears, let's go. She cleared her throat. 911, she said, her voice shifting instantly into a frantic scream. Please, I need help. It is my father. I think he is not breathing. It was an Oscar-worthy performance, and I was the front row audience. Now, Roy shouted through the earpiece. The lights in the room blazed on. We had to move quickly. The window of opportunity was closing. And physics, the god I had worshipped for 68 years, does not pause for sentiment. Roy and his team worked with the efficiency of a pit crew. They moved the operation from the living room up to the master bedroom. That was the logical place for an old man to die in his sleep, or to collapse after a sudden cardiac event. It felt strange to have strangers swarming through my sanctuary, planting tiny camera lenses in the spine of my favorite architectural history books, hiding microphones behind the drapes, and positioning tactical officers inside my walk-in closet. We need to clear the street, Roy barked into his radio. I want all patrol cars gone. Move them 3 blocks over to Cedar Avenue. Kill the lights. I want this neighborhood to look asleep. I stood by the window, watching the flashing red and blue lights vanish, leaving the street in darkness. A single ambulance arrived a moment later, rolling silently to a stop down the block, its lights extinguished. It sat there like a hearse in waiting. The stage was set. "James," Roy said, placing a hand on my shoulder, "it is time." I looked at my bed. The duvet was turned down, just as I had left it that morning. "Do you want me in the bed?" I asked. "No," Roy said. Scanning the room, floor between the bed and the nightstand. "It looks more accidental, like you tried to get up and fell." I nodded. I lay down on the carpet. It was a plush beige wool I had installed for Martha, because she hated cold floors in the morning. Now, it was my deathbed. I arranged my limbs awkwardly. One arm flung out. My head tilted back, I closed my eyes and practiced my breathing. Shallow. Barely perceptible, I had to become an object. I had to become a corpse. "Comfortable?" Roy asked, his voice tight. "No." I said, "But I suppose that is the point." "We are sending the text from Boyle's phone now," Roy said. He tapped out a message on the burner phone they had bagged, as evidence. "Done, looks like a heart attack clean." "Send it," I whispered. "Sent." Roy said, "Now we wait, everyone. Vanish." The room emptied. The heavy oak door of the closet clicked shut. Concealing 3 armed officers, Roy stepped into the master bathroom, leaving the door cracked just an inch. The silence that descended on the house was heavy, suffocating. It was not the peaceful silence of solitude. It was the tense, vibrating silence of a trap waiting to be sprung. I lay there in the dark, listening to the blood rush in my ears. I thought about Elena. I thought about the day she was born. How tiny her hands were. How she had gripped my finger with a strength that surprised me. I thought about the science fair projects we built together. The bridges made of popsicle sticks. When had the stress fractures appeared? When had the load become too much for her moral foundation to bear? I had missed the signs. I had been looking at the structure of buildings, when I should have been inspecting the structure of my own family. Time stretched minutes, felt like hours. My shoulder ached against the floorboards. My throat was dry. Then, I heard it. The low hum of an engine turning onto the driveway. The crunch of tires on gravel. My heart hammered against my ribs. A traitorous drumbeat that threatened to give me away. Calm down. I told myself, "You are dead. Dead men do not have palpitations." The car door opened and closed softly. No slam. I heard the front door unlock. The tumblers in the deadbolt turned with a smooth, well-oiled slide. She had her key ready. She did not fumble. "Dad," her voice drifted up from the foyer. It was tentative, quiet. I did not answer. Footsteps on the stairs. They were not the frantic, rushing steps of a worried daughter. They were slow, deliberate. Clack, clack, clack. She was walking with a steady rhythm. She was not running to save me. She was walking to verify a transaction. She reached the top of the stairs. She did not call out again. She knew where to go. She walked straight down the hallway toward the master bedroom. The door creaked open. I kept my eyes closed, but my other senses went into overdrive. I could smell the rain on her coat. I could smell the stale, metallic scent of fierce sweat, not hers, but my own, and I could smell her perfume, that expensive floral scent she wore to faculty meetings. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. I could feel her gaze on me. It felt like a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. She stepped into the room. The carpet muffled her footsteps, but I could feel the vibrations as she moved closer. She stopped right beside me. "Dad," she whispered. There was no tremor in her voice, no panic, just a cold curiosity. She knelt down. Her nylon stockings made a swishing sound. I felt the warmth of her body radiating near my face. Then, her fingers touched my neck. They were cold, shaking slightly, but not from grief. It was adrenaline. She pressed 2 fingers into the hollow of my throat, searching for the carotid pulse. I held my breath. I willed my heart to stop beating. I envisioned a dam stopping a river. Holding back the flow of blood, I knew she could probably feel the faint flutter, the thrum of life that refused to be extinguished. But I hoped the adrenaline of her own crime would mask it. She held her fingers there for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Then, she pulled her hand away. She let out a breath. It was a long, shuddering exhale. And then, she spoke. "I am sorry, Dad," she whispered for a split second. A foolish, desperate part of me hoped for a confession of regret. I hoped she would break down, shake me, try to wake me up. I hoped she would dial 911 and scream for help for real. But then she continued, her voice hardening into something unrecognizable. "But I need that money more than you do. You had your life. This is mine." The words hit me harder than the baseball bat I had used on the hitman. You had your life. As if my existence was a resource she had a right to harvest. As if I were just a bank account with a pulse. She stood up. I heard the rustle of her coat as she adjusted it. She paced a small circle around my body, like a shark circling prey, ensuring it was truly dead. "Okay," she muttered to herself. "Okay, focus, tears, panic, you can do this. Elena, just like the drama club." She cleared her throat. She took a deep breath, holding it, then forcing it out in jagged gasps to hyperventilate, to induce a state of physical distress. "Oh God, oh God, oh God," she practiced, her voice pitching up into a hysterical range. She pulled her phone from her pocket. I heard the tap, tap, tap of her fingernails on the screen. She was dialing 911. "Hello," she screamed at the empty room, rehearsing the opening line. "Please, I need an ambulance. My father, I just found him. He is blue. He is not breathing." It was a perfect performance. It was chilling. It was the sound of a sociopath, wearing the mask of a grieving child. She hit the call button. 911. "What is your emergency?" The operator's voice was faint, tinny, leaking from the speaker of her phone. "Help me." Elena screamed into the receiver, dropping to her knees beside me, grabbing my shirt with her free hand and shaking me violently. "It is my dad. He is dead. I think he is dead." That was the signal. "Move, move, move." Roy's voice exploded from the closet. Click-clack. The sound of tactical lights engaging the bedroom was instantly flooded with blinding white light. Beams cut from the closet, from the bathroom, pinning Elena in a crossfire of illumination. "Police, drop the phone, get on the ground." Elena shrieked a real scream this time, a primal sound of pure terror that had nothing to do with acting. She scrambled backward, crab-walking away from me, her phone clattering onto the floor. "Hands, show me your hands." Officers poured out of the woodwork. They were everywhere, black uniforms, body armor, weapons drawn but pointed low. I opened my eyes. I sat up. The movement was slow, deliberate. I felt like Lazarus rising from the grave. But there was no miracle here, only justice. Elena froze. She was pressed against the foot of my bed, her face pale as a sheet, her eyes wide, staring at me. Her mouth opened and closed. But no sound came out. She looked at the police, then back at me, her brain unable to process the resurrection. "Dad," she wheezed. It was a tiny, broken sound. I looked at her. I looked at the daughter I had raised. I looked for the little girl in pigtails. I looked for the young woman in the graduation cap. I looked for the lecturer who quoted Kant and Aristotle. They were all gone. All I saw was a stranger who had stood over my body and calculated the return on investment of my death. I stood up. My knees were stiff. But I forced myself to stand tall. I smoothed down my shirt, which she had wrinkled with her fake grief. "Hello, Elena," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice I used when I delivered bad news to a client about a failing foundation. It was the voice of absolute, final authority. But you were." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Boyle said." "Boyle is in custody," Roy said. Stepping forward, he holstered his weapon and pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "And so are you." "No," Elena stammered, shaking her head violently. "No. This is a mistake. I came to check on him. I found him like this. I was calling for help. We have it all, Elena." I said, "The cameras, the microphones, the text messages, the client contact." I pointed to the bookshelf where a tiny lens glinted in the spine of The History of Roman Architecture. "We heard your rehearsal." I said, "We heard you say you needed the money more than I needed my life." Elena's face crumpled. The mask fell away completely. There was no more pretense of innocence. No more fake confusion. There was only the ugly, naked face of a gambler who had bet everything on a losing hand. "You don't understand," she screamed, scrambling to her feet as Roy grabbed her arm. "They were going to kill me. $2 million, Dad. They were going to kill me." "So you decided to trade my life for yours?" I said. "You are old," she shrieked, struggling against Roy's grip. The venom in her voice was shocking. "You lived your life. You have the house, you have the pension. It is just money to you. It was my life to me." "It was not just money," I said softly. "It was trust. It was love. And you spent it all." Roy spun her around and slammed her against the wall. Clack, clack. The handcuffs ratcheted tight around her wrists. "Elena Davis," Roy recited the Miranda warning, his voice a monotone drone. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit capital murder, attempted murder, and solicitation of murder. You have the right to remain silent." I watched as they marched her out of the room. She was sobbing now. Ugly, heaving sobs. Begging me to tell them to stop. Begging me to pay her debts. Begging me to be her father one last time. "Dad, please don't let them take me. I am your daughter, Daddy." I stood there. Motionless as a statue, I did not reach out. I did not look away. I bore witness to the collapse when they dragged her through the doorway. She looked back one last time. Our eyes met. "I don't have a son," I had said in the police station in my mind's rehearsal. But looking at her now, I realized the truth was far worse. I tried. I whispered to the empty room. I tried to build you strong, but the foundation was flawed. The room fell silent again. The police were gone. The cameras were still recording, capturing an old man standing alone in his bedroom. Surrounded by the wreckage of his heart, I walked over to the window and looked down at the street. I saw them shove Elena into the back of a squad car. I saw the blue lights reflect off the wet pavement. I turned away. I could not watch her leave. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a notification from my bank, an automated alert. Automatic payment, life insurance premium, $40,000 processed. I stared at the screen. I let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like a bark. I canceled the policy right then and there. I walked out of the bedroom. I could not sleep there tonight. I could not sleep in this house tonight. I walked down the stairs, past the living room where the ghost of my daughter's fake grief still lingered, and out the front door into the cool, clean night air. The ambulance was still there. The driver looked at me, confused. "Do you need assistance?" "Sir," he asked. "No." I said, "There is no body, not anymore." I walked down the driveway to where Roy was waiting by his unmarked car. He looked at me, his face etched with concern. "James," he said, "do you want to ride somewhere?" "A hotel." "No," I said. "Take me to the station. I want to finish the statement. I want it done." "It is 3 a.m, Roy said. "I am not tired." I lied. I looked back at my house one last time. It stood tall and imposing against the night sky, a masterpiece of Victorian architecture. It was sturdy. It was valuable. It was safe. But as I looked at the dark windows, I knew I would never call it home again. It was just a structure now, a shell. The life inside had been evicted. "Let's go." I said to Roy, "Drive." The handcuffs clicked shut around Elena's wrists with a sound that was final and absolute. It was the sound of a steel door slamming on a life that had once been full of promise. The tactical officers hoisted her to her feet, their grip firm but professional. She was not struggling anymore in the physical sense her legs had given out. Dragging uselessly across the carpet, she had played on as a child, but her mouth was still working, pouring out a stream of desperate, fractured logic that she hoped would save her. "You do not understand," she wailed. Her face streaked with mascara and sweat. She twisted her neck to look at me, her eyes wide and frantic, searching for the father who had always fixed her mistakes. "Daddy, please listen to me. They were going to kill me. The men from the syndicate, they sent me photos of my apartment. They knew my schedule. They gave me 48 hours. I stood by the window, my back rigid. I looked at this woman who shared my DNA, my last name. And the color of my eyes, I tried to feel pity. I tried to summon the biological imperative that compels a parent to protect their offspring, no matter what. I searched the depths of my heart for a shred of empathy for her terror. I found nothing. The well was dry. The reservoir of love I had held for 36 years had been drained, drop, by her deception. And tonight, the dam had collapsed completely. "I had no choice," she screamed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek as the officers began to march her toward the door. "What was I supposed to do? Let them kill me. I am your daughter. You are supposed to protect me." "Stop," I said. The word was not loud, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. The room fell silent. The officers paused. Looking at me, Elena stopped thrashing, her chest heaving, hope flickering in her eyes. She thought she had reached me. She thought the old man was going to write one last check to make the bad men go away. I walked over to her. I stood 2 feet away, close enough to smell the sour tang of her fear, but far enough that I could not touch her. I looked her up and down, inspecting her like a building that had failed inspection. "You had a choice," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly steady. "You could have come to me. You could have told me the truth. I would have sold the house. I would have cashed in my retirement. I would have faced down every loan shark in this city to keep you safe. I would have given every last penny I had to save your life." Elena flinched, as if I had struck her. But you did not ask for help," I interrupted, cutting her off with a razor-sharp edge. "You did not want my help. You wanted my death. You decided that my life was a fair exchange for your gambling debts. You decided that the man who taught you to walk, who paid for your education, who sat by your bedside when you were sick, was expendable." "I was scared," she sobbed. "I was just so scared." "We are all scared," I said coldly. "I was scared tonight when I was hiding in the basement while your hired killer hunted me. I was scared when I had to lie on this floor and play dead for my own child." Fear is a reaction. Elena, courage is a decision. You decided to become a murderer. I leaned in closer, my eyes locking onto hers. "You are not my daughter," I whispered. The words tasted like ash, but they were the truest words I had ever spoken. "My daughter died a long time ago. I do not know who you are, but you are a monster." She stared at me, her mouth open, the shock of the rejection hitting her harder than the handcuffs. Then she began to scream. It was a wordless, animal sound of despair. "Get her out of here," I said to the officers. I turned my back on her. I heard the scuffle of boots, the sound of her weeping fading down the hallway, down the stairs, and finally, out the front door. I did not turn around. I listened until the front door closed, severing the connection between us forever. The room was quiet again. Roy was standing by the door, watching me with a sad, weary expression. He holstered his weapon and walked over, standing beside me as I stared out at the darkness of the street. "You did good, James," Roy said softly. "It is over." "Is it?" I asked. I felt numb, as if my entire body had been injected with the Novocaine of shock. "She is gone. Boyle is gone." But there is one thing I still do not understand. What is that? Roy asked. The woman. I said Clara, the woman at the grocery store. I turned to face Roy. The question had been gnawing at the back of my mind through the entire ordeal. How did she know? Roy. She knew Elena was leaving for school. She knew about the attic. She knew the timing. She was a stranger. I had never seen her before today. How could a homeless woman know the details of a murder plot, hatched by my daughter and a professional hitman? Roy frowned. He pulled his radio from his belt. We have a team scrubbing the supermarket footage right now. He said, let's find out. We drove to the precinct in silence. I sat in the passenger seat of Roy's unmarked car, watching the city pass by. It looked the same as it had yesterday, the rain-slicked streets, the neon signs, the traffic lights, but it felt like a foreign country. I was a refugee in my own life. At the station, we went straight to the tech room. A young officer was sitting in front of a bank of monitors, reviewing video files. We found her, the officer said as we walked in. He tapped a key, bringing up a freeze frame on the large central screen. It was grainy. CCTV footage from the Whole Foods parking lot. The timestamp was from 3 days ago. Who is she? I asked, leaning in. Her name is Clara Miller, the officer said, reading from a file. No relation to Captain Miller. She is 72, former librarian. She has been on the streets for about 4 years, since her rent-controlled apartment building was condemned. She is harmless, known to sleep at the bus shelter on 45th Street. 45th Street, Roy repeated. He looked at me. James, isn't that near the university? It is 2 blocks from Elena's apartment, I said. The realization sparked a small flame in the darkness of my mind. Show me the footage, Roy commanded. The officer played the video. It showed the parking lot of the grocery store. It was raining then. 2. The camera angle was wide, covering the rows of parked cars. Watch the bottom left corner. The officer pointed in the corner of the frame. Huddled under the overhang of the cart return corral was a small figure, wrapped in a gray coat. It was Clara. She was sitting on an overturned crate. Seeking shelter from the wind, she was invisible to the shoppers rushing past. She was just part of the urban landscape, a piece of debris that people learned not to see. Now watch this, the officer said. He fast-forwarded the timestamp. A silver sedan pulled into the spot right next to the cart corral. I recognized the car immediately. It was Elena's. She did not get out a moment later. A black SUV pulled up alongside her. The driver's window rolled down. Elena's window rolled down. That is Boyle's rental. Roy noted. We matched the plates. The officer switched to a different camera angle, one that looked down the row. We could see Elena's face clearly through her open window. She looked agitated. She was talking fast, gesturing with her hands. Boyle was leaning out of his window. Listening, do we have audio? I asked. No. The officer said. Parking lot cameras are video only, but look at Clara. I looked back at the small figure in the cart corral. She was less than 6 feet away from Elena's car window. She was sitting perfectly still, her head bowed, pretending to be asleep, but her head was turned slightly. Her ear was angled toward the conversation. She heard everything, I whispered. Wait, Roy said. There is more. Look what Elena does next, on the screen. Elena held up her phone. She was showing Boyle something on the screen. She zoomed in on an image and held it steady for him to see. Boyle nodded. Then, he looked past Elena, scanning the parking lot. His eyes swept right over Clara, dismissing her as a pile of rags. They were discussing the hit, Roy said, his voice grim, right there in public arrogant amateur. But how did she know it was me? I asked. She saw a picture on a phone that is not enough to recognize me in a checkout line 3 days later. Keep watching, the officer said. The video jumped forward 10 minutes. The meeting ended. Boyle drove off. Elena stayed in her car for a moment, then got out. She walked toward the store entrance, Clara stood up. She waited a few seconds, then followed Elena. She kept her distance, shambling along, looking at the ground. The officer switched to the interior camera of the store. We watched Elena walk through the produce section. She was on her phone again, talking animatedly. She stopped by the floral department. Clara appeared in the background. Pushing a cart with a few meager items, she was shadowing Elena. She was stalking her, I said, amazed. Why? Survival instinct, Roy muttered. You hear someone planning a murder. You want to know who the monster is. Elena stopped near the deli counter. She was still on the phone. The officer isolated the audio from an overhead security microphone. It was faint, mixed with the hum of refrigerators and bad pop music. But we could hear it, yes. He lives on Birch Street, the big Victorian number. He is old. He will be alone. Elena paused, listening to the person on the other end. I told you, she snapped. Hide in the attic. The hatch is in the upstairs hallway. Go up there in the afternoon. Wait until he sleeps when I leave for my night class. You do it. I felt a chill run down my spine. There it was, the smoking gun, the specific instructions. Clara was standing 2 aisles over, pretending to look at a can of beans. She was close enough to hear every word. She heard the address. I said, she heard the plan. Check the attic when she leaves for school. But she still did not know what you looked like, Roy pointed out. The officer fast-forwarded to today's footage. The checkout line, I saw myself on the screen. I looked tired. I was staring at the ceiling. Clara was in front of me. She was distressed, counting her coins. Then, the moment happened. I stepped forward. I handed the cashier my card. I watched Clara turn around. I watched her look at me. And then, I saw her reaction. It was subtle, but on the high-definition screen, it was unmistakable. Her eyes widened. She looked at me. Then, she looked past me, toward the entrance. Pause. I said, what is she looking at? The officer switched to the entrance camera. Standing just inside the automatic doors, out of the rain, was Elena. She was not in the car. She was there. She was watching me. She was shadowing you too. Roy realized. She wanted to make sure you were at the store, so Boyle could get into the house. She was the lookout. I stared at the screen. Elena was watching me pay for the groceries. She was checking her watch. Clara saw me. Then she saw the woman she had followed 3 days ago, the woman who had ordered a hit on an old man standing there watching me. The connection snapped into place. I was the target. The kind man who had just paid $28 for her cat food was the man in the Victorian house. The man who was going to die tonight. I watched the screen as I walked Clara out. I saw her grab my arm. I saw the urgency in her posture. She took a massive risk. Roy said quietly, if Elena had seen her warning you, she could have been killed too. She did not care. I said she saw a debt and she paid it. I sat back in the chair, overwhelmed by the symmetry of it. My own daughter, whom I had given millions of dollars in tuition, housing, and support, had sold my life for a gambling debt. A stranger, a woman with nothing, whom I had given $28.40, had saved my life at the risk of her own. The ledger of the universe was balanced in the most terrifying way possible. Where is she now? I asked. Patrol found her back at the bus stop on 45th. The officer said, they brought her in. She is in the waiting room. We did not know if she was a suspect or a witness. She is neither, I said. Standing up, she is family. I walked out of the tech room and down the hall to the waiting area. Clara was sitting on a plastic bench. She looked even smaller than she had in the store. She was wrapped in a police blanket, drinking a cup of lukewarm coffee. Her feet barely touched the floor. She looked up when I entered. Those blue eyes were still sharp, still clear. She did not smile. She just nodded. A slow, solemn acknowledgement of our shared survival. You checked the attic, she said. It was not a question. I checked the attic. I replied. I walked over and sat down beside her. I did not care about the smell of old rain and unwashed clothes. I did not care about the dirt on her coat. "You saved my life, Clara," I said. She shrugged, looking down at her coffee. "You saved my cat," she whispered. "He was hungry. He is all I have." I felt a lump in my throat the size of a fist. It was so simple. Goodness was so simple. Evil was complex. It required plans, burners, jammers, and lies. Goodness was just a can of soup and a warning in the rain. "You have more than that now," I said. "You have me." Roy appeared in the doorway. He held up a set of car keys. "They are taking Elena to county jail." He said, "Do you want to see?" I nodded slowly. I needed closure. I needed to see the physical removal of the threat. I stood up and offered my hand to Clara. "Come with me," I said. "Please." She hesitated, then placed her rough, cold hand in mine. We walked out to the loading dock of the police station. The rain had stopped completely. The air was crisp and cold. A transport van was waiting. 2 officers were leading Elena out. She was not screaming anymore. She was slumped, defeated. A broken doll in an orange jumpsuit. She looked up and saw me. Then she saw Clara standing beside me, holding my hand. Her eyes widened in recognition. She remembered the homeless woman in the parking lot. She remembered the invisible witness she had ignored. The realization hit her. She had not been brought down by a grand police investigation. She had not been outsmarted by a genius detective. She had been undone by her own arrogance, by her inability to see the humanity in a person she considered beneath her. She lowered her head. The doors of the van slammed shut. I watched the taillights fade into the distance. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. "I need a ride home," I said to Roy, "but not to stay. I just need to pack a bag." "Where will you go?" Roy asked. I looked at Clara. "We are going to a hotel," I said, "the best one in the city. And then, we are going to find a house, a small house with no attic." I looked back at the empty street where my daughter had vanished. The Victorian house on Birch Street was just wood and stone now. The memories inside were tainted. The legacy I thought I was building was gone. But as I squeezed Clara's hand, and felt her squeeze back, I realized that the foundation had not collapsed. I had just been building on the wrong ground. It was time to start over. The gavel came down with a sound that was less like a bang and more like a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. Elena Davis, my daughter, the former university lecturer, the secret gambler, the architect of my near death, was sentenced to 30 years in a federal penitentiary for conspiracy to commit capital murder, attempted murder, and solicitation because of the special circumstances, the financial gain, the premeditation, the cruelty of the method. The judge showed no leniency. She will be 66 years old before she is eligible for a parole hearing. I did not go to the prison to visit her. I did not accept her collect calls. I did not read the letters she sent, which the prison warden told me were filled with more excuses, more blaming of the syndicate, and zero accountability. I burned them unopened in the fireplace of the house she tried to kill me in. Some people might call that cold. They might say a father's love should be unconditional to them. I say this: love is a two-way street when someone plants a bomb in your foundation. You do not invite them back in to light a match. You condemn the building and you walk away. And that is exactly what I did. The day after the sentencing, I put the Victorian house on Birch Street on the market. The real estate agent, a woman named Sarah, who had known us for years, tried to tell me I was rushing things. She told me the market was soft, that if I waited until spring, I could get another $100,000, sell it. I told her, I do not care about the price, I want it gone. I want to sign the papers and never look at this address again. Living there had become impossible every time I walked down the hallway. I saw the attic hatch every time I sat in my armchair. I remembered the tea every time I looked at the garden. I saw the window where Boyle had peered in. The house was not a home anymore. It was a crime scene. It was a mausoleum of false memories. It was a beautiful, structural lie. I realized that for the last 20 years, I had been living in a museum of a family that did not exist. I had been polishing the furniture and tending the garden for a ghost. It sold in 3 days to a young couple from California who loved the historic charm. I did not tell them about the holes in the attic insulation or the steel reinforcements in the basement door. I just handed over the keys, took my check, and walked away without looking back, with the money from the house sale, which was substantial, over $1.5 million, and my own savings. I had a decision to do. Elena had wanted this money. She had been willing to stop my heart to get it. It felt cursed to keep it all for myself. It felt like blood money. So, I decided to clean it. I decided to turn the instrument of my potential death into an instrument of life. I established the Clara Fund. It is a non-profit organization dedicated to helping the invisible people of Seattle, the elderly homeless, the women sleeping in bus shelters, the people who fall through the cracks of the system, just like Clara did. We do not just give handouts. We provide housing, legal assistance, and dignity. We look for the people that the rest of the world walks past. And speaking of Clara, she was my first case. I found her a small, one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Queen Anne. It has a view of the Sound. It has a strict pets allowed policy for her cat. I paid the rent for the next 10 years in advance. I furnished it with new furniture, not used, not donations, but brand new things that she picked out herself. I remember the day I gave her the keys. We were standing in her new living room, the smell of fresh paint in the air. She looked different. She was clean, wearing a warm wool coat I had bought her, and her hair was trimmed and combed, but those blue eyes were the same, sharp, knowing, and kind. "You did not have to do this," she said, running her hand over the back of a velvet sofa. "The groceries were enough." "The groceries were a transaction," I said. "This is gratitude you gave me the rest of my life, Clara." "The least I can do is make sure you enjoy the rest of yours," she cried. Then, it was the first time I had seen her cry. She didn't cry when she was hungry, or cold, or terrified in that parking lot. She cried because she was safe. We have dinner every Tuesday. She is not just a charity case. She is my best friend. We talk about books, we talk about the weather, we talk about the engineering of bridges, and the Dewey Decimal System. We never talk about Elena. We never talk about the attic. We understand that those things are the foundation of our friendship. But they are not the structure we live in. We are two survivors who found each other in the rain, and that is enough as for me. I moved downtown. I bought a penthouse condo in a modern steel and glass tower. It is the opposite of the Victorian house. There are no dark corners. There are no creaky floorboards. There is no attic. The building has 24-hour security, cameras in every hallway, and a doorman who checks every visitor. Some might say I am paranoid. I say I am engineered for safety. I like the clean lines. I like the transparency. I like that when I look out my window. I see the city spread out below me, a grid of lights and logic. I can see the structural load paths of the skyscrapers. I can see the traffic flowing like blood through veins. It makes sense. It is honest living here, in the quiet safety of my new life. I have had a lot of time to think. I have had time to deconstruct the collapse of my family and to analyze the failure points. I realized something profound. Something that I want you to hear. Really hear. We are raised to believe that family is the ultimate bond. We are taught that blood is thicker than water, that you stick by your kin no matter what. That is a dangerous lie. Biology is just chemistry. It is just DNA. It does not carry a moral code. It does not guarantee loyalty. Elena was my blood. She was half of me, and she looked at me and saw a paycheck. Clara was a stranger. She owed me nothing, and she looked at me and saw a human being worth saving. Family is not who you are born to. Family is who you would bleed for. And more importantly, who would bleed for you? Family are the people who stand guard when you are sleeping. Family are the people who warn you about the snow, who whisper the truth when it would be safer to stay silent. I also learned a hard lesson about self-preservation for years. I ignored the signs with Elena. I ignored the distant behavior, the requests for money, the coldness in her eyes. I ignored them because I was being a good father. I thought that sacrificing my own comfort, my own instincts, was what love looked like. I was wrong. Self-preservation is not selfishness. It is a responsibility. You cannot protect anyone else if you do not protect yourself first. If I had listened to that polite voice in my head, the one that said, "Don't be rude. Drink the tea. Don't offend your daughter," I would be dead. I would be a statistic. We have an obligation to listen to our gut. That voice that tells you something is wrong. That is not paranoia. That is millions of years of evolution trying to keep you alive. That is your structural integrity sensor going off. If you feel a draft in your life, if you hear a creak in the floorboards of a relationship, do not ignore it. Do not paint over it with politeness. Investigate it. Shine a light on it. If your son, or your daughter, or your spouse, or your best friend is acting strange, if their eyes don't match their smile, if they ask questions they shouldn't ask, do not brush it off. Do not tell yourself you are crazy. Check the attic. Check the basement. Check the bank accounts. Check the text messages. It might break your heart to find out the truth. It broke mine. It shattered it into a million pieces. But a broken heart still beats. A stopped heart does not. I would rather be a lonely old man with a living heart than a beloved father in a coffin. I am standing on my balcony now. It is a clear, cold night in Seattle. The rain has stopped, and the air is crisp. I have a cup of tea in my hand. It is Earl Grey. I made it myself. I boiled the water. I steeped the bag. I know exactly what is in it. I take a sip. It tastes bitter and hot and clean. It tastes like life. I look down at the city, somewhere down there, in a warm apartment. Clara is feeding her cat somewhere else, in a concrete cell. Elena is staring at a wall. And here I am, James Davis, 68 years old, structural engineer survivor. I lost my past. I lost the future. I thought I was going to have. But I have tonight. I have this breath. I have this tea. And I have the peace of mind that comes from knowing that the monsters are not in my ceiling anymore. They are locked away. And I am holding the key. Life is fragile. It can be taken from you by a stranger in an alley, or by the person who kisses you goodnight. You cannot control who tries to hurt you, but you can control whether you open the door. So, keep your lock strong. Keep your eyes open, and if a stranger whispers a warning in the rain, for God's sake, listen. Thank you for listening to my story. It was not an easy one to tell. But if my experience can save even one of you from making the mistake of blind trust, then it was worth reopening these wounds. I want to know where you are listening from. Are you safe in your home? Drop a comment below with your city and country. I read every single one of them. It reminds me that I am not alone, that there is a community of survivors out there. And please, if you believe in justice, if you believe that the truth deserves to be heard, do me a favor. Subscribe to the Bittersweet Revenge channel. Hit that like button to help the algorithm share this warning with others. And smash that hype button. Let's make sure this story travels further than the lies my daughter tried to tell. Stay safe. Watch your back, and never, ever ignore the creak in the ceiling. Until next time.